Sir, where are your citizenship documents? The real ones, not just a driver's license.
Excuse me, who asked for those?
People like you always seem suspicious. Let me see proof of citizenship.
Evan Calder watched the security monitors with the kind of focus that usually preceded a kill. He didn't care about the routine processing or the mountain of paperwork sitting on his desk. He looked for anomalies. He looked for things that didn't belong. And right then, at 9:47 a.m., he found one. In the middle of the gray, open floor of the secure wing stood a man who didn't fit the landscape. He wasn't wearing a uniform, and he wasn't wearing the orange jumpsuit of a detainee. He was in a plain black sweater and dark jeans, standing perfectly still, holding a briefcase. Calder leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. In this facility, anyone not in a uniform was either a threat or a mistake. To Calder, they were usually both. He didn't check the visitor log. He didn't call the front desk to see if an appointment had been cleared. He didn't need to. He saw a black man standing in a high-security zone without an escort, and his gut told him everything he thought he needed to know. It was an instinct he'd honed over 15 years in the field, an instinct that often ignored the law in favor of a feeling. To Calder, the man looked too calm, too composed. That composure felt like a challenge. "Whitlock, Kincaid, with me!" Calder barked, grabbing his tactical vest. He didn't explain what they were doing. He didn't have to. His team knew the drill. They followed him out of the monitoring room and down the hall, their boots heavy against the hard floor. Calder felt that familiar surge of adrenaline. He wasn't thinking about safety protocols or identification procedures. He was thinking about the power he held in this building. He was thinking about how easy it was to take someone's day and turn it into a nightmare, just because he could. As they pushed through the double doors into the main floor, Calder didn't slow down. He marched straight toward the man in the black sweater. He didn't see a human being with rights. He saw an intruder who had bypassed his kingdom. He saw a target. Before he even reached the man, Calder had already decided how this was going to end. He was going to strip this man of that calm expression, find out how he got in, and throw him into a holding cell until he felt like dealing with the paperwork. He hadn't said a single word yet, but in his mind, the man was already guilty.
If you're ready to see institutional racism exposed and shut down, smash that like button. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss tomorrow's story, where cops pick the wrong person to mess with and instantly regret it. Let me know in the comments if this story hit you.
The heavy double doors hissed shut behind the three agents, cutting off the hum of the hallway. Tavien didn't turn around. He stayed focused on the blue light of the digital clock on the far wall as it ticked over to 9:47 and 4 seconds a.m. He could hear the rhythmic thud of combat boots approaching, a sound designed to announce presence and intent. He kept his hands visible, gripping the handle of his briefcase with just enough pressure to keep it steady, but not so much that his knuckles turned white. "Don't move." A voice barked from behind. Tavien remained still. Within seconds, the three men had formed a tight semicircle around him. Evan Calder stood directly in front, blocking Tavien's path to the elevators, while Miles Whitlock and Jonah Kincaid moved with practiced precision to his left and right. They didn't just stand near him. They crowded his personal space, forcing him to look up slightly to meet their eyes. They were wearing full tactical gear, camouflage fatigues, heavy ballistic vests with IC stamped in bold yellow letters across the chest, and blackface masks that obscured everything but their eyes. Kincaid crossed his arms, his biceps straining against the fabric of his sleeves, while Whitlock rested his hand near the holster on his hip. It was a classic three-point stance, a physical cage meant to make a person feel small and isolated. The air in the center of the room felt suddenly thin. Tavien could smell the scent of gun oil and stale coffee coming off the men. They were looking for a flinch, a stutter, or a quick movement toward a pocket, anything they could interpret as a threat. Calder stepped an inch closer, his chest almost brushing Tavien's shoulder. He didn't speak immediately. He just let the weight of their presence sink in. The silence was tactical. Around them, The rest of the facility seemed to hold its breath. Staff members at distant cubicles looked up from their monitors, but quickly looked away, recognizing the familiar pattern of a field interrogation. Tavian looked Calder directly in the eyes. He didn't show fear, but he didn't show defiance either. He simply waited, watching the timestamp on the screen hit 9:47 and 20 seconds a.m. The intimidation was the process, and the process had officially begun. Calder didn't back away. He let the silence hang for another beat, then gestured toward Tavian's hands. "ID now," he said. His voice was flat, the kind of tone that didn't expect an argument. Tavian didn't reach for his pockets. He knew that in a room full of twitchy men with holsters, a sudden movement was a mistake you didn't get to fix. "I'm happy to provide identification," Tavian said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "However, under Federal Administrative Code and the Fourth Amendment, you are required to state the reasonable suspicion for this stop before I'm compelled to comply in a restricted access zone I've already cleared." Calder's eyes crinkled at the corners, but not because he was being friendly. He let out a short, dry bark of a laugh that echoed off the metal cubicle walls. He looked over at Whitlock, then back at Tavian. "We got ourselves a jailhouse lawyer," Calder said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "You hear that, boys? He's quoting the handbook. Probably spent his morning memorizing it off a poster in the lobby." Whitlock snickered, shifting his weight. "Maybe he thinks the floor is a courtroom," he added. Calder leaned in so close Tavian could see the flecks of gray in the agent's stubble. "Listen to me, counselor. This isn't a TV show, and you aren't in front of a jury. You're in my house. In here, reasonable suspicion is whatever I say it is. Right now, my suspicion is that you've got a forged visitor pass and a briefcase full of things you shouldn't have." He tapped his finger hard against the front of Tavian's black sweater. "You can give me your ID, or I can take you to the ground, cuff you, and find it myself. Which way do you want to play this?" Tavian didn't blink. He knew the law was on his side, but he also knew that in this moment, the law was 300 miles away, and Calder's hand was 3 inches from his throat. "I'm not refusing to identify myself, Agent Calder," Tavian said, using the name on the man's vest. "I'm asking you to follow the standard operating procedure for a Tier 2 facility check. If you bypass that, you're acting outside of your qualified immunity." Calder laughed again, but this time there was an edge of genuine anger to it. "Qualified immunity? You really are a piece of work. You think those big words make you bulletproof?" He stepped back and signaled to Kincaid. "He wants to talk about procedures. Let's show him the one for non-compliant intruders. Put the briefcase on the floor, lawyer. Slow, or things are about to get very loud in here." The tension in the center of the room acted like a physical weight, pushing everyone else toward the edges. Beyond the tight circle of tactical gear and camouflage, the regular facility staff, those in the standard blue button-down uniforms, stopped moving. They stood behind low partitions and next to humming printers, their eyes darting between Tavian and the 3 agents. None of them moved to help. A woman near a stack of processing files gripped the edge of her desk, so hard her knuckles were white. She looked like she wanted to say something, to perhaps remind Calder that a visitor who had made it past the triple-locked gates usually had a reason to be there. But she caught Calder's eye as he glanced around the room to gauge his audience, and she immediately looked down at a blank computer screen. She knew the hierarchy. In this building, the blue uniforms handled the data, but the camo vests handled the power. The silence from the observers was louder than the agents' mockery. It was the silence of people who had seen this fun before and knew that intervening only meant getting caught in the gears. Tavian noticed a young clerk near the back, Wall slowly reach for a desk phone, then hesitate and pull his hand back as Kincaid shifted his stance, his heavy boots scuffing the floor with a sharp, aggressive sound. The message was clear. This wasn't a debate, and there were no witnesses, only spectators. Tavian could see the fear in their eyes, a mirror of the very systemic intimidation he had been sent to document. These people weren't just watching a man get harassed, they were watching a demonstration of what happened when someone dared to question the men in charge. One older man in a blue shirt let out a long, slow breath and turned his back completely, focusing on a filing cabinet as if he could erase the scene by simply refusing to acknowledge it. They were waiting for the inevitable sound of the briefcase hitting the floor, the click of handcuffs, and the end of the show, so they could go back to the safety of their routine. Calder reached for the handle of the briefcase, but Tavian didn't let go. He didn't pull back aggressively. He just anchored his arm and met the agent's eyes with a level of calm that clearly unnerved the man. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity through the small circle. Whitlock and Kincaid tightened their grip on their gear, their eyes darting to Calder for the signal to escalate. "Let go of the bag," Calder said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm giving you one last chance to do this the easy way." "This bag contains sensitive federal documents," Tavian replied, his voice projecting just enough for the blue uniform staff to hear. "Under the Privacy Act and department protocols, I am not required to disclose its contents to field agents without a specific warrant or the presence of a facility supervisor. I am more than happy to open it once a supervisor is standing here to witness the inventory." Calder sneered, his hand tightening over Tavian's on the handle. "You think you're calling the shots? I don't need a supervisor to tell me how to secure my own floor. I've got a suspected intruder refusing a lawful order. That gives me all the probable cause I need to uncover the lies you're hiding in here." He looked over at Kincaid. "Get the zip ties. Since he wants to be a lawyer, we'll let him draft his defense from a holding cell." Tavian didn't flinch as Kincaid reached into a side pouch. "If you break the seal on this bag without authorization, you are violating Section 1505 of Title 18, Tavian said. "You will be obstructing a federal inquiry before it even officially begins. Think very carefully about your next move, Agent Calder. Is your ego worth your pension?" The mention of the pension hit a nerve. Calder's face flushed a deep, angry red. He yanked at the briefcase, trying to wrench it away, but Tavian dropped his center of gravity, refusing to be moved. The sound of scuffing boots and heavy breathing filled the space. "Force is authorized for noncompliance," Calder hissed, his face inches from Tavian's. "I'm going to count to 3. If you're still holding this bag, I'm going to put you on the floor, and I'm going to make sure you stay there while we take apart everything you brought in here." He began to count. 1. Tavian didn't move. He kept his eyes on the digital clock. 9:48 and 12 seconds a.m. He knew the regional director's morning briefing ended at 9:45. He just needed to hold the line for another 60 seconds. 2. Calder's hand moved toward Tavian's throat. Calder's fingers were inches from Tavian's collar when the pressurized hiss of the North Wing security doors cut through the tension. The sound was followed by a sharp, rhythmic click of dress shoes, a stark contrast to the heavy thud of tactical boots. Regional Director Marcus Vance stepped into the open floor, holding a tablet and looking down at a schedule. He didn't look up immediately. He was speaking to an assistant trailing behind him about the day's high-level briefing. "The inspector should have touched down 20 minutes ago," Vance was saying, his voice carrying the effortless authority of a man who ran 3 states' worth of facilities. "I want the reception committee ready in the lobby, and I want those audit files pulled for—" Vance stopped mid-sentence. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room, and settled on the cluster of tactical gear in the center of the floor. He saw Whitlock and Kincaid with their hands on their holsters, and he saw Agent Calder physically looming over a man in a black sweater. From Vance's angle, it looked exactly like what it was, a backroom ambush happening in broad daylight. Calder didn't let go of the briefcase. He didn't even look back. "Director, we've got a situation here," Calder shouted, his voice full of the false bravado of a man who thinks he's doing his job. "Found this individual roaming the secure zone without an escort. He's being non-compliant, refusing a search. I was just about to initiate a hard takedown to secure the perimeter." Vance didn't move for a long second. His face went from confusion to a pale, sickly shade of realization. He recognized the man in the black sweater immediately. He had seen that face on every internal memo, every federal news briefing. and in the private security dossier he had spent all morning studying. The intruder wasn't a trespasser. He was the primary reason the facility's budget was currently under review. Calder, Vance said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a tremor of absolute terror that made the blue uniformed staff at the desks freeze in place. Take your hands off him. Right now. Calder frowned, finally glancing over his shoulder. Sir, he's resisting. He's quoting law like he's... I said take your hands off him. Vance roared, the sound echoing off the metal walls. He moved faster than anyone had ever seen him move, nearly stumbling as he rushed toward the group. Whitlock and Kincaid, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, instinctively stepped back, their hands flying away from their belts. Vance reached the circle and pushed past Calder, standing between the agent and Tavian. He was breathing hard, his eyes wide as he looked at Tavian, who still hadn't moved a muscle. The director didn't look at his men. He looked only at the man he had been tasked to impress, who was now staring at him with a cold, analytical gaze. Mr. Cortez, Vance stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry. There has been a catastrophic failure in communication. Tavian finally let go of the briefcase handle, but only because the pressure from Calder had ceased. He smoothed the sleeve of his black sweater and checked the digital clock. 9:49 and 15 seconds a.m. Not a failure in communication, Marcus. Tavian said, quietly, his voice cutting through the silent room. A failure in culture. Your men didn't see an inspector. They didn't even see a citizen. They saw a target, and they thought they had the privacy to hit it. Calder stood frozen, his hand still hovering in the air where the briefcase handle had been. He looked from Tavian to the director, the color slowly draining from his face as the word inspector began to sink in. The smirk was gone. The predator was suddenly the prey. Tavian didn't wait for an invitation. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and visible, and placed the briefcase on the gray floor. The click of the latches opening sounded like a gunshot in the absolute silence of the room. Calder, Whitlock, and Kincaid stood paralyzed, watching as Tavian's hand disappeared into the side pocket of the bag. He didn't pull out a standard driver's license or a plastic visitor's badge. He withdrew a heavy, cream-colored folder embossed with the gold seal of the Department of Justice. He stood up and handed it directly to Director Vance, but his eyes never left Agent Calder's face. You wanted to see my papers, Agent, Tavian said. I suggest you read along over the director's shoulder. Vance's hands were shaking as he opened the folder. The first page wasn't a request for entry. It was a signed executive order, effective as of 8 a.m. that morning. It detailed the immediate commencement of a top-down integrity audit of the regional tactical units. As Vance flipped to the second page, his face drained of what little color remained. Attached was a list of names under the heading Immediate Administrative Suspension Pending Civil Rights Investigation. Calder's name was at the very top of the list, followed closely by Whitlock and Kincaid. That document grants me the authority to seize all field equipment, communication logs, and personal badges of the officers listed, Tavian explained, his voice echoing with a cold, professional edge. It also authorizes me to shut down all processing operations in this wing until every agent has undergone a formal conduct review. You were worried about a jailhouse lawyer uncovering lies, Calder. It turns out I'm the one authorized to burn them down. Calder stepped back, his mouth hanging open. He tried to speak, to perhaps offer the excuse that he was just following security protocol, but the words died in his throat as he saw the director's thumb move over the official holographic seal at the bottom of the page. This wasn't a fake ID. This was a legal execution of his career. Tavian reached back into the bag and pulled out a digital recorder. He pressed the button and held it up. Every word of the last 5 minutes has been logged. The mockery of the law, the threats of physical force, and the refusal to follow Tier 2 identification protocols. You didn't just fail a test, Agent. You provided the first 10 pages of my report. The blue uniformed staff behind the desks were no longer looking away. They were staring at Calder, watching the man who had bullied the floor for years suddenly shrink under the weight of a single piece of paper. Vance didn't wait for a rebuttal. He turned to the facility's internal security detail, the men who actually guarded the gates, not the field agents who roamed them. "Secure their service weapons," Vance ordered, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and desperation to save his own skin. "Now, hand over your badges, your sidearms, and your comms. You are to be escorted to the south exit immediately." Whitlock was the first to move. He looked at Tavian, then at the floor, and slowly unclipped the holster from his belt. The heavy thud of the Glock hitting the laminate floor seemed to vibrate through the entire room. Kincaid followed, his face a mask of disbelief as he handed over his credentials. The men who had been a wall of muscle and threats just minutes ago now looked smaller, their shoulders slumped as the weight of the tactical gear became a burden rather than a suit of armor. Calder stood motionless. His hands were shaking. He watched as a junior security officer reached out to take his badge, the piece of tin he had used as a shield for his own ego for over a decade. He pulled it from his belt, but didn't let go immediately. He looked at Tavian, the smirk gone, replaced by the desperate, pleading look of a man who realized he had just destroyed his life in under 10 minutes. "Mr. Cortez?" Tavian, Calder started, his voice thin and raspy. "Look, I was just, the tension lately, the security alerts. I was overzealous. I'm an officer who cares about the safety of this building. I'm sorry. I truly didn't know who you were. If I had known, I never would have." Tavian didn't interrupt him. He just stood there, his arms crossed, watching Calder with a clinical, detached silence. He didn't offer a nod of understanding or a glare of hatred. He remained as unreadable and still as the digital clock on the wall. The lack of a response was more crushing than any lecture Tavian could have delivered. It forced Calder to listen to the echoes of his own hollow apology. "If you had known," Vance spat, stepping toward Calder, "you would have treated him with respect, which means you think respect is something you only owe to people with power. That is exactly why you're finished." Tavian remained silent as the security team stepped in, placing their hands on the agent's elbows to lead them out. Calder tried one last time to catch Tavian's eye as he was walked toward the door, a final plea for some kind of human recognition. But Tavian simply turned his back, picked up his folder from the director's shaking hands, and began walking toward the elevators. He didn't need to say anything. The silence of the room and the sudden absence of the men who had tried to break him said it all. Tavian walked straight to the supervisor station at the head of the processing floor. He didn't ask for permission. He pulled out the heavy rolling chair and sat down, placing his briefcase on the desk surface with a firm thud. Director Vance stood a few feet away, hovering awkwardly, looking like a man waiting for his own sentencing. Tavian ignored him, focusing instead on the large monitor mounted to the desk. He swiped his personal credential card, the one Calder had refused to look at, across the reader. The system chirped, and the screen flashed from a generic screensaver to a high-level administrator portal. Tavian checked the time. The digital clock on the wall now read 10:15 a.m. In less than 30 minutes, the power dynamic of the entire building had flipped. "Gather the staff," Tavian said, his voice quiet but carrying easily across the now silent room. "Everyone, blue shirts, security, and the remaining field agents. I want them at the center of the floor in 2 minutes." Vance scrambled to comply, nodding frantically to his assistants. As the staff trickled in, forming a wide, hesitant circle where the confrontation had just taken place, Tavian remained seated. He didn't stand up to give a grand speech. He didn't need the height to command the room anymore. He looked at the faces of the people who had watched him get harassed, the people who had stayed silent out of fear. "My name is Tavian Cortez," he began, looking at the crowd. "Most of you were here at 9:47. You saw what happened. You saw how easy it was for 3 men with badges to decide that a person's rights were optional based on how they looked or what they wore. That ends today." He tapped a key on the desk, and the facility's internal loudspeaker system crackled to life, broadcasting his voice to every corner of the wing. As of 10:15, this facility is under an administrative hold. Every active case file handled by Agent Calder's unit is being pulled for immediate civil rights review. Every camera feed from this morning has been uploaded to a secure server at the DOJ. If you participated in or covered up a violation of protocol, you have until the end of the shift to submit a voluntary statement. After that, it becomes a criminal matter. The room remained deathly still. The regular staff looked at each other, a few of them finally exhaling breaths they seemed to have been holding since the morning. Tavian looked back at the monitor and began typing his first official report. He didn't look up as he spoke his final directive to the director. Marcus, clear out your office. I'll be using it for the duration of the audit. And find someone to bring me the full personnel files for the night shift. We're going to see how deep this goes. Tavian didn't watch them leave. He kept his eyes on the screen, his fingers moving steadily over the keys. The facility was quiet now, but it wasn't the fearful silence of an hour ago. It was the sound of a system being forced to finally follow its own rules. The 10 hours and 15 minutes timestamp stayed fixed in his mind, the exact moment the law stopped being a weapon for the bullies and became a shield for everyone else. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in next.